Let's look back again. We're trying to look at our fantasy hits of the last season. Michael Bolton, he's the biggest hit of all.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and just a reminder that if you put a theme song for an 80s sitcom over the Predator end credits, it fits perfectly. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go. It is the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly, so join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or on Google Play. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free, and we are available on all platforms. The Double Bangers are here, the DB squad, ready to thumb it up, ready to leave the comments, and of course, subscribe. Let's make up for the guys that are unsubscribing with some new subscribers coming in, hopefully, fingers crossed. Yesterday, on the show, I was an idiot. I was in, just got back from overseas. The regular season has ended brain. And I was supposed to do all the fantasy hits that we had. And I was going to look at the guys that we successfully were ahead of in ADP and the guys that I successfully avoided, who I was well behind ADP and it worked out. But of course, I only did half of that. Then I started going on a tangent about, oh, Mikal Bridges should be here. Yeah, he should, Josh, because you forgot to do half the show. So here's the other half of the show, because I just went too long on that other one. So what we're going to do is look at the players that were hits, fantasy hits, which is what we're doing here, but for a different reason. They're the guys that we were like, yeah, I don't know about that. That ADP looks off. That looks high. I'm not interested in that player at that point, and it worked out. So that's what this is about. So there are two ways to be right and two ways to be wrong, usually. It's you can be ahead of consensus, and it works out, or you can be lower than consensus, and that player doesn't live up to that consensus expectation. Two ways of being right there. Both equally valid. I don't know which one of those, again, is more impactful. Is it more impactful for hitting the guy late or hitting the guy that you jump 20, 30 spots ahead of ADP with, that you get them at ADP at 70 and they end up 40 or whatever it is? Or is it more important to avoid a player in round 3 when they're a round 6 guy, or round 2 when they're a round 7 guy? I don't actually know what the answer is as to which one's more valuable, but they both are. So we're going to talk about a bunch of players where my avoidance or my that ADP seems wrong, busts, if you will. I think that's just a stupid term, but we all use it because we know how it gets traffic through and people are familiar with that term. The guys that maybe we looked at as potential busts. And we're going to talk about this bloke first. We're going to go to Toronto. We're going to start in Toronto, then we're going to fly to Indiana because we're talking about Pascal Siakam, who I thought was insanely highly ranked. Yes, the consensus on him was, well, we know that Van Vliet's gone, so people seem to think both Barnes and Siakam would get gigantic boosts, which obviously both couldn't happen to that level. But 29 for Siakam was a crazy number. I was never in on him at that spot. It made no sense to me whatsoever. I had him 56th in the preseason. That's with my -1 rankings. He started out the season shooting disgustingly. I think 8% from 3 for about a month and a half. And of course, he did get traded in January to Indiana, where he just continued to be solid enough. Now, you can't say that the trade is what ruined his season, because the trade is still under 50% of the season, because he was struggling before the trade. And he could have been better, obviously. But overall, this is a W. I had him 56th. He ended up 64th. His ADP was 29th. So you would have burnt, 29 means you're burning an early second to mid-second. Sorry, early third to mid-third to maybe late third. When we're talking ranges, it's an average, obviously. That's what the A stands for. 30 is mid-third round. So 29 is at the early half, which some people would have gone to 25 or 24 or 22 or 18 or whatever. I saw that a couple of times. Or some would have let him slide to 32 or 33. And none of those worked. It was just, again, it's very easy to say this here because I looked at it and I had the process and I got it right. So to me, it was an easy process, but that's not always the case. That's unfair to look at it that way. But I expected this. It worked out that way. And I'd be very interested to see what we look at with Siakam. We're going to do this when we look more into the Pacers season when it's over. We're talking about after they lost that first game in the playoffs, which he was good. No one else was. He was good. The differences in usage and value and stat distribution versus in Toronto versus Indiana to how we position him next season. He averaged 38.14 fantasy points, which was good for 45th per game for Siakam, which is solid enough. Still not worthy of that's basically the end of round 4 versus the middle of round 3. Not paying off the way you want. He always is a better points league guy than a category league player. And that was true again. Just didn't pan out. This one was probably one of the best ones again where I thought the process was pretty infallible. But in saying that, I still got it wrong, even though I got it right. Because again, the only way to actually get it right is to just nail it absolutely bang on. Right? I thought this guy would be 80th and he was 80th. That's how you get something right. So I was out on Mikal Bridges. Yes, I did see what he did at the end of last season. It didn't make any sense to me that him hitting mid-ranges at 48% or whatever is a sustainable model for value going forward. We saw the defensive stats all fall away in Brooklyn as he took on more offensive responsibility, and all of that stuff reverted. The defensive stuff stayed low. The efficiency fell way off, and then as the season went on, he just got worse and worse and worse. Now, I wasn't as low on Mikal as he ended up being. I had him 35th. His ADP was 20th. Yeah, 20th. What the hell? He ended up 84th, which is worse than his Phoenix seasons when he was the 4th offensive option. But he was able to get those Phoenix season values through shooting 65% from 2 and having high steals, elite field goals, elite free throws. On this team where his usage went up, he wasn't able to do any of that. And again, this is one that I was pretty clear in saying absolutely not. I'd be selling every single piece of Mikal Bridges, what I said in Dynasty. I'd sell every piece of him in Dynasty League because people were treating him like this top 15, top 20 player. I was like, he's 28. The team is never going to be good. It's him as their number one guy, and I don't buy any of this stuff. But again, I was still not low enough at 35. Now, I successfully avoided him in every single league, which is that counts as the W, but I was nowhere near where he was, 84th, not even close to it. And you'll tell me, but Josh, he played every game. If your only selling point for a player is they play every game, then you've only got one way to go, and that is down. And Mikal went down even though he did still play every game. Because he is not Wolverine. I assure you of this. He will get hurt at some point. Knock on wood. Don't know when it will happen. I hope it doesn't. But he will. He will get hurt at some point. And then the value that you ascribe to him because, he's an Iron Man, never gets hurt. Well, it goes out the window and it means nothing. You cannot get better from there. You cannot improve on that. You can't be he'll play 90 games this season. You can't. You can't improve on it. So, 32.56 fantasy points, which puts him 74th. That is a disaster picking that at number 20. That's where we get into the discussion. If picking someone at 20 and they end up in the 80s, is that worse than picking someone at 40 who ends up 100th? Both 60 spots of difference. It's clearly worse to grab a guy at 20 who ends up 80, though. Importance or the area where you take them does matter. So that's where we are with Bridges. A poor season, and honestly, the Nets are insane for not trading him away, given the reported offers are out there. Absolutely ridiculous. Mismanagement. Can't believe that a general manager would stay through those sort of mismanagement decisions. Insane. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It is the easiest and the most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and favorite players. You just pick more or less than individual stats on 2 or more players, and you get them right, and you watch the winnings roll in. The NBA playoffs are here, and you can now get in on that action and win 100 times your money by getting as little as 4 correct picks. You can do it for the basketball playoffs. You can do it for the hockey playoffs. We've got Major League Baseball season up and running as well. Whatever it is that you're looking at, whatever sort of sport, hockey, basketball, League of Legends, you can be looking at LeBron, you can look at Connor McDavid, someone by the name of Jude Bellingham, who I don't know who that is. Let's just say you can look at Shohei Ohtani, or you can look at Ronald Acuna, in terms of guys that you can stick in to your PrizePicks entries. PrizePicks also is available in over 30 states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That is price. Well, download the app. The code is LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Price picks. Pick more, pick less. It is that easy. Make sure you're also checking out our Locked On Sports Today 24/7 stream on YouTube instead of listening to people who have no idea on other channels pretending to know about the sports they're covering by telling you that Quentin Grimes and Isaiah Hartenstein are performing a really strong bench for the Knicks. You can check out our host of engaging hosts who actually know what they're talking about on the Locked On stream today. Locked On Sports Today stream live on YouTube 24/7. Okay, so Bridges was the last one. We're going to go to Oklahoma City. And we're going to talk about Josh Giddey. Now, there were definitely things with Giddey that impacted him off the court. Now, there's going to be no punishment on any of those situations. We never have even got full clarity on anything about the scenario. But all we know is the girl's family wasn't pressing charges, and that's it. Nothing else is happening with that, and it clearly messed with him, right? And we saw him get better as the season went on. But to me, the addition of Chet Holmgren onto this team is why I was very much not interested in drafting Josh Giddey. Because there was issues with his shooting, obviously, which did take big steps forward in year 2. But one of the big strengths of Giddey was rebounding. And adding Chet into the team meant that somebody else was going to be grabbing rebounds. We saw them start guys that weren't really centers at all in previous seasons, or guys who were anywhere close to that level of what Chet was. So Giddey was that leading rebounder, I believe, the season before, and that was always going to cut down. Plus, we expected a slightly larger role from Bronco Jalen Williams, and that all happened. So I had Giddey 91st. He ended up 133rd. So again, I was way too low on him. But I reckon that 91 for Giddey is probably where he ended up after those first 2 months of the season went, and we found out there was no charges or anything like that happening, and then he sort of started to get back into the action. His ADP at 59, obviously not knowing that those allegations were surfacing at that point, it just didn't make sense to me. I couldn't really get my head around how he would do that. Yes, we see players going into year 3 improve a lot, often, nearly all the time, not always, but it's always about context. That 59 basically just said, well, he's just going to be the same player as the year before, and I didn't buy that for a second. Points leagues, he averaged 28.77, and he went 102nd there. So just all in all, drafting Josh Giddey, which in effect is round 5, it's a massive L, and I avoided it. My numbers there suggest that we avoid it. Now, obviously, when we get head-to-head and we talk a lot of stuff in category leagues, you can say, well, I'm just actually really desperate for assists, and that bumps Giddey's value way up. And that's fine. That's where things get a little bit iffy at times when talking rankings and valuations and all that stuff, because we get into situations where we look at scarcity and prior picks on your team and what other players getting those stats are coming and where you're playing. So it always all over the shop. And it's almost impossible, I think, to develop any sort of algorithm or ranking system that takes all of those things into consideration, because it's just going to be dynamic and depending on every single person at every single league at any point, and that sort of stuff's impossible. We do it through Basketball Monster on our draft tracker to try and give you that changing valuation, but in terms of evaluating things this way, just really can't do it. So this is, I think, the best approximation, where Giddey was an avoid, and that worked out. I was also absolutely not interested in or at all in Shavano Buddy Hield. The old man himself, my understanding was heading into the season that he would be coming off the bench behind Benedict Mathurin. He'd already requested a trade. I didn't know where he was going to go. His game relied upon getting a lot of minutes, get 30 plus of them, score, and hit threes. And while he is very clearly a better player than Benedict Mathurin, I don't think there's any debate about that. He very clearly was a better player than Benedict Mathurin. If they weren't going to start him, well, there's no chance I was taking him at ADP, which was 83. An insane pick. That's round 8? Round 7. It's the end of round 7 for a bench player who ended up playing 22 minutes a night or whatever it was coming off the bench. I had him 118th. Now, again, avoided him everywhere. Then there was a period when he did actually get back into the starting lineup and became more useful. And then he got traded, and then everyone was very excited about his huge role in Philadelphia, but of course he went to Philadelphia, had 2 good games when everybody was out, and did nothing after that, and got worse and worse and barely played. And he ended up somehow, I don't even know how this happened, but he ended up 145th. I'm shocked he ended up actually that high. But he was a guy that I was staunchly not drafting. It worked out pretty well. 83 ADP, I was 118. He finished 145. That's a strong avoid right across the board. It was just pretty obvious to me. Not that he would get traded, but he requested to be traded. They obviously had no interest in keeping him at a good salary or at a salary that would be commensurate with we value you as a starter. They didn't start him, and yeah, that worked out. He averaged 22.89 fantasy points, which meant that he was 161st in points leagues, which clearly just isn't good enough. Now we're going to go to the first of two Boston Celtics players. I was going to talk in this show, well, he was going to pop up. His name was sort of there, Jason Tatum. Jason Tatum had an ADP of 5. On my night before the season, my end of preseason rankings, I had Jason Tatum with -1 at 10. But that would be disingenuous of me to say, well, yeah, like Tatum was going at 5, but I said, nah, fade him and get him at the end of the first round, because I was like, okay, I was debating whether you go with him at 6. There's a little bit of safety in there. I didn't think that he'd lose a huge amount with guys coming in because those sort of top line players, maybe he's not that top line player. He is, but like maybe he's not the absolute top guy. Those guys don't tend to lose out when other players join them. I thought he'd be okay with, like, again, not guarantee he's going to play a million games, but we didn't go into the season going, well, he's dealing with an injury or he's going to have to rest some games and have this management plan. We didn't have any of those concerns with Tatum. So I was like, okay, 6, maybe we look at it. Just a level of... Now, there were some who were going to take him at 1 or take him at 3 or whatever, and that was crazy to me. But I'm talking Tatum here. I don't know why I'm going on this tangent. But me having him at 10 in the per-game numbers, when he obviously finished nowhere near the ADP of 5, like I could have said that's a W, but it's not, because I would have taken him higher than 10. Based on playoff schedule and a level of health heading into the season. The Celtics guy that I was off is Jaylen Brown. He had an ADP of 36 heading into the season, which again is basically just like, well, we just think you're going to do the same as you did last season, even though we got Jrue Holiday in there, even though we've got Kristaps Porzingis in there. And it's very easy to say Jrue replaces Marcus Smart, but adding Porzingis in for Rob Williams is a completely different scenario for a guy that Porzingis, honestly, he might be a better player than Jaylen Brown. At least he's a high usage guy, and that was going to have an impact. Jaylen had some struggles this season, absolutely. He ended up fine, but not anywhere near that number. I had him 51st. He ended up 57th. His ADP was 36, and his points rank was 46th, averaging 37.78. So if you did take Jaylen Brown at the end of the third, or, again, that's an average spot at 36, reach up to 31, 32... Yeah, that's an L. That's losing 25 spots. That's 2+ rounds you're losing. That's not a good move. I avoided that. I've always usually been lower on Jaylen Brown from a fantasy perspective anyway, just because it's like, what are you doing? Like below average rebounds, assists, steals, blocks. Percentages are never elite. The usage is fine, but if you get someone coming in to take the top off it, like Porzingis, where do you sit? Well, you end up sitting down here, 57th, and not at number 36. Which is where he was initially. Today's episode is also brought to you by BetterHelp. Yes, we all need that opportunity sometimes to get something off our chest. Big or small, there are certain things that really start to get to you, and it is important that you get that stuff off your chest. Like, you don't want to keep it bottled up. No one wants to do that. Now, therapy is not just about, hey, my sports team lost the first game of the playoffs. I'm a Pacers fan. They got smashed by the Bucks without Giannis. Like, of course, that's not super important, but learning also how to process disappointments or get the small things off your chest out of the way to someone unbiased in your life, like a therapist, is a way that you can like free up space to deal with the things that are actually a problem in your life, work, relationships, family, whatever it is. So, if you've been thinking about starting therapy, well, BetterHelp is here. Therapy can be different for everyone. And we've got those bigger problems than our favorite sports team, being the disaster in the first game of the playoffs. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba to get 10% off your first month. That is betterhelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. Today's episode is also brought to you by Monopoly Go. I get these ads and talk about them and go, Monopoly Go, that's fine. I downloaded it because they're sponsoring us. And I played it and went, oh no. I'm actually in on this game. Like, I look at it and go, when are my dice refilling? You know Monopoly, the classic board game. Well, this is like Monopoly, but obviously on your phone, but fast-paced. You're not waiting for other people to have turns. You're building up Monopoly boards in different locations. I think I'm up to a level 11 now on that one. Just building up little hotels and put your properties there. You get people to pay you rent. You go in and get into a bank heist and take money out of their accounts. You smash down their buildings. It is super fun. You're going to be like, hey, I need those dice. Give me that cash. I need to build these properties. I need to get through the next board. It is unbelievably fun, addictive, and a competitive game that is super fun. Play with your friends, but also play against them. Work in international time tournaments as well. So get the download Monopoly Go free on the App Store and on the Google Play Store as well. Okay. We talked about one Boston Celtic player. Let's talk about the next one, because Jrue Holiday was someone that I was not low enough on, but low enough in the end. Jrue had an ADP of 43, which again is like just a crazy number. Jrue was traded obviously from Milwaukee to Portland and then to Boston, where he slid in to be the starting point guard. And we were like, okay, their depth is not super strong, the Celtics, so Jrue should be able to maintain a level of value. And I had him 62nd, so I did push him back a little bit. But he just saw like one of the biggest usage drops that you will ever see. Maybe not ever see, but like it's an insane usage drop. He was able to still hit his threes at a high rate, but the defensive stats fell away. He couldn't finish with his twos, and there was just no hope of getting him as a fourth round player. And to me, again, that's one that pretty easy to avoid. 62nd in the preseason. He ended up 87th overall. His fantasy points rank was 95th, averaging 29.35, which is just miles away from where he had been in the past. Like the year before, he averaged 19 points on 25 usage. This season, 16 usage. He averaged under a steal a game. He shot 52% on twos versus 55 the year before. So we saw the dreaded usage drop, defensive stats drop, efficiency drop. Yeah, that's not great. He went under 50% from the field for the first time in... Well, not the first. That's not true. His overall field goal percentage ended up being the same because he upped his threes. But overall, that usage drop killed the lack of, or the massive drop in assists as well, which we weren't sure that would happen. But Derek White took over a big portion of the playmaking, and he just fell away. So while I was right to be out on him, he was worse again than I expected. But I wasn't drafting Jrue Holiday anyway if I was waiting until round 6 to get him. It wasn't going to be someone that I'd be having many times on my team. Let's go to a couple of later round guys. Now, you know my methodology on this was not about taking, well, here's the guy that was an ADP of 140, and I said, nah, don't like him there, because at that point I'm like, do whatever you want. But when it's inside the top 10 rounds, then they are still relatively valuable picks. And there are two that I'm going to bring up here who were those later ADP round 10, which means in some spots they'd go round 9, which was crazy to me. And you would have heard me rail on and on and on about these guys through the preseason, through the regular season, through all of the season before even as well. And I was right. Don't worry, we're going to get to the show tomorrow where I was wrong, but I was right. Who's the first one? It's the big fella, Gaz Trent in Toronto. I thought, look, what a weird offseason for Trent. As soon as he picked up his player option, Chris Haynes said, yeah, the Raptors and Trent are working out a long-term extension. I'm going, why would they do that? That doesn't make sense. He's not good for start off. So why would they do that? Then, of course, he never signed that extension. So we thought, okay, they're going to trade him. Yeah, it makes sense that they would trade him. Why would they be keeping him when they drafted Dick to put in his place? And then they never did. So I was like worried about where's the role. They've got Dick now, so they can use Grady instead of Gary. They might trade him. I'm really worried about what his positioning is going to be. But I don't know. He's still got opportunities down the stretch, and he put together some nice runs at times, but overall, he's Gary Trent. Trent was 114 in ADP. Again, that is 10th round. That is a starting spot on a fantasy team. I had him 144, so even there again, I was off. He ended up 190th. But I was like, okay, 140, I can see some minutes here. I can see some okay production. We worried about where the steals would be without Nick Nurse there and Darko in his place. Worried about the minutes and the usage, and I think all of that turned out okay. But I had him 144th, he ended 190th, he had 168th in points leagues at 22.47, and you know that I just go on and on and on about Trent being A, not good, and B, not a good fantasy player. And the reason he looks to be a good fantasy player by traditional rankings at times is the overvaluation of steals and the fact that he has never turns it over ever. And those things inflate the value to make you think that he's good, when in fact, he is not. The next one is a relatively easy one, I thought, because this is easy. I say this all the time, but it's always like, ooh, we love what he does. We love what he is on court. His defense is awesome. He's this unbelievable defender. He's got this great role. He's going to be, this is the year. And this happened last season. It happened this current season. And I was like, yeah, but you need to actually have the opportunity to do things. And you have to actually show something apart from being a guy that guards well, because that doesn't do anything for us in fantasy. And you know who I'm talking about, I think. It's Jaden McDaniels, who was one spot higher than Gary Trent in ADP, 113. I had him 138, so again, I was well behind him. No interest in round 10. He's a bad fantasy player, and he was way worse this season, like horribly worse. 216th he was this season in category leagues. In points leagues, 207. He didn't even crack 20 points a game, 19.48, because for as good as you think he is defensively, he gets nothing defensively stats-wise. He does nothing with usage. He gets no usage. He gets no assists. He doesn't rebound well at all. He's playing small forward when realistically he's a power forward. He's not a reliable shooter. What does he do here? Like, nothing. He gets into foul trouble as well. His minutes go all over the shop. He is just terrible for fantasy. And he is very much in the position of, you need to show me this for 3 months, and I'll happily be wrong on it for me to be convinced. It is 4 years in now, and he has been bad for fantasy every year. Yes, there were some low-minute years, but nothing has ever stood out in his profile to go, well, here you go. Here is a stud in waiting. Peyton Watson, Denver, stud in waiting. Give him the minutes, and we are talking not quite, but maybe what Jonathan Isaac could have been without the injuries. That's where we're at with Peyton Watson. This bloke, no way. He just doesn't do anything. No usage, no rebounds, doesn't hit threes, no assists, no steals, no blocks, iffy percentages. What do you do that's good? The answer is nothing. You play minutes, but who cares when you're doing nothing with him? Anyway, that's enough of hating on Jaden McDaniels. He's a solid enough real-life player. I think he's maybe a little overrated there because maybe do something, get a little bit better somewhere. But he's a very easy fade in fantasy for me. He will be again next season, although I doubt people are going to be drafting him in round 10 or in some cases round 9. I'm almost certain that won't happen next season. But I guess you never know. Maybe it does happen. Some other names that I just want to mention, not that they were gigantic W's, but they were solid enough W's. 5 more guys I want to talk about here. OG Anunoby, I was out on him by about 20 spots or so. Here, OG had an ADP of 51, which again was crazy. It's always a pretty solid idea for the guy that leads the league in steals the year prior to assume that they won't lead the league in steals the next season after. It's just an easy hack. At some point, that guy will come back and maybe be a guy that sort of replicates his steal numbers. But it's such an easy hack for a guy that is well up there, like OG was 1.9 in steals, to say, well, he might be 1.4. It just works often. And when that drives your value, well, that's where it is. There was the chance of more usage for him, but we saw, this is what's interesting, we saw a slight elevation for Scotty Barnes' ADP, a big elevation for Pascal Siakam, and a pretty big elevation for OG Anunoby because of Van Vliet leaving. Yet, Siakam didn't live up to it. Anunoby clearly didn't live up to it. Barnes did. Interesting how that sort of went that way. But I had OG down at 65. He didn't even end up as a top 100 player this season. Michael Porter Jr. had an ADP of 83. Again, I just looked at his numbers from the year before and go, what's actually getting better here? Like, what are we seeing that's going to be a big improvement? And he did make some improvements. He played a few more minutes. His rebounding went up. I was always a little bit worried about where the back is with him. Had him like 10, 12 spots below that, around about 93, 94. Avoided him. He didn't get to 83. Worked okay. I had Clint Capella here as well. His ADP was 77. While I thought there was a chance that Onyeka Okongwu would get an opportunity to minute split, and he didn't quite get there, but we got like 26-22 for Capella Okongwu. I was pretty confident that Clint wasn't going 29, 30 minutes. We saw the block rate decline. He's getting older. I was always worried about that. So I was okay to fade him off, and I think that worked all right. I had him at 87th. He ended up 99th. His number was 77. Andy Wiggins, again, did not foresee this. Wiggins had an ADP of 90, which for points leagues usually can be okay. He's usually okay in points leagues, but for category leagues, he struggles. I actually had him boosted to 101, which is high for me for Wiggins. I was like, okay, we'll see a few little things here. We've got relatively consistent minutes and role. I think he's going to be all right. He was dreadful for months, and then he had a slight stretch of being good, and then he was back to being below average. He ended up 237th. So while I did avoid Wiggins in a lot of spots, not aggressively avoid, I didn't know he'd be that bad. And then Russell Westbrook had an ADP of 109, which of course made no sense to me to be grabbing Westbrook in round 9 as a backup when we thought that... Oh, actually, that's not true. He was a starter because we were waiting for Harden to get traded there, but Westbrook just has so many deficiencies in his game that there were times even last season when he would start that they would take him off the floor to close to get the other guys the ball more because playing Zubats and Westbrook together doesn't work particularly well. I ended up having him as 120th because, again, Harden wasn't there at that point. He ended up 178th, but as soon as Harden arrived, there was no hope of Westbrook hitting that number, which was too high to begin with. But again, it wasn't massively out on him at the 109 spot. For points leagues, he's obviously better, much like Wiggins. He ended up 131st, which is not as good as 109, but obviously better than where he was in a category league format. And that's the end of looking at those fantasy hits from the positive hit versus a negative hit, the guys that we successfully went after or the guys we successfully avoided. Just, again, trying to use some sort of methodology with this versus did this guy just beat ADP by a lot? But I'm more looking at this as a self-evaluation as well. Which guys was I high on? Which guys was I low on? And how did that work out? And that's what we're going to do when we look at the misses as well. Who was I high on that just, I was like, I'm below ADP in it, or I'm above ADP and it didn't work out, or I'm below ADP and it did work out. We're going to look at those in the next series of shows as well. So while you're waiting for those, you can go back and double bang this. You can thumb it up. You can subscribe, of course, and leave all of your comments down below. Enjoy the rest of the playoffs. Hopefully we get a road team to win a game after the first game of all the series is done. It's all home teams. Again, don't read huge amounts into game ones. Game ones happen, but doesn't mean this. It's always hard to look at it and you go, man, they killed him. Wow. Every series is going to be a sweep now. We saw the results in game one. Nothing can possibly change. It will. We just need to see how it does change. Enjoy the playoffs. Enjoy the rest of the NBA regular season. Or not regular season, playoff season. But I'll be back tomorrow. Guys, I'll see you later. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.